Okay, Umoya Ulight, Umoya Upright. Welcome to another episode of Moya live streams. We really appreciate all the support you guys are giving us. Please remember to subscribe to the channel. Please remember to like, share, and most importantly, please watch all the adverts so that you guys can help us contribute. As you know, on the Moya podcast, we like to link the present, the past, and the future, and to ensure that future generations actually know the real history of our country. As you know, there's a lot of erasure happening, and in our schools, you're not going to get the history that is the history. Today is so exciting. You guys, you know Mangaliso Sobukwe. We don't have any records of him. We don't have any voice recordings. We don't have anything, but he's still the most significant, one of the significant figures in history, and the president that we missed out on. And we keep hearing bits and snippets about him, and we are hungry for this knowledge. And the irony is that this guy was an Africanist, but now we've got a white guy who is actually gonna unpack him for us and tell us who he is from on a personal level and give us the story of who he was. And that Benjamin POGRUND has got a has documented Sobukwe, and he was a friend of his, and he used to visit him in Robben Island. So finally, we've got a small link. We did try have other sessions with his family, but it's sometimes easier to get the man from an outside point of view. My elder, Molweni, Dr. Benjamin POGRUND, thank you so much for accepting the invitation.
Thank you.
Gama, Gama. Okay, so let's start at the beginning. I hope you're ready to give us scoops and stories. And as you know, in our culture, we depend on storytelling to pass on the history from generation to generation. And we've had very little information on Utatu Robert Sobukwe. So I know you did his biography. So can you give us his story and tell us about the man, and then obviously about your friendship? I won't interrupt you much, but here and there, if we want clarity, I will jump in. And there will be comments and questions from the audience as well. And thank you for your time. I hand over to you.
I'm always glad to talk about Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe. And you know, a good way to start, I was thinking about it. My wife Anne, we've been married 56 years, and we were married when Bob had been released from the island and was in banishment in Kimberley. And we got married in October 1969. And he applied to come to the wedding. He was refused, so he sent a telegram of greetings. And then, as soon as possible afterwards, I drove with Anne to go and visit him in Kimberley. And because he was banned, he wasn't allowed to be with more than one person at a time. So I collected him and I couldn't go into the township Galashewe. I wasn't allowed to as a white person, but we used to meet on the edge of the township. And I drove him to the Kimberley Art Gallery where we used to go because it was a quiet place and we could walk quietly without being overheard by people. And I dropped Bob off and I went and fetched Anne at the hotel and took her there and dropped her off. Now, she was very nervous. I'd always been talking about Bob. She had heard a lot about him. She had never met him. And she wasn't much into politics. She was an artist. But I took from my book, my biography of him, I remembered it, and I turned up. Her first meeting with Sobukwe, and this will tell you, I think, a great deal. On page 321 of my biography, How Can Man Die Better? She says she was apprehensive. Many South Africans, she remembers, if they had been me speeding along the road to Kimberley, would have felt excited at the prospect of meeting the famous Robert Sobukwe. But I'd never especially wanted to meet famous people as such, least of all politicians. I'd certainly been moved by his solitary state on Robben Island, etc., etc. But I wasn't at all sure how we would get on. And then she says, he stood up as I approached, a tall, elegant man with such life and kindness shining in his face that my shyness immediately vanished. and so did my misgivings. I liked him enormously straight away. So that tells you the person immediately. And in my case, um, I was obviously white. I'd been interested against apartheid from the age of about 15 at high school. I spent my entire life occupied with apartheid as a journalist, as a student, exposing it, fighting it. So I'd heard about Robert Sobukwe. There was tension. This was at the end of the 1950s. There was a lot of tension inside the African National Congress, which was in a legal body. And I heard about this group, the Africanists, who were fighting inside the organization. And there was this man, Robert Sobukwe, who was teaching at Witwatersrand University. And my then fiance was in fact a student of his. And just by the way, just as a little thing, tussen hakkies in brackets, I keep reading, people write silly things about Sobukwe. They dishonor his memory. And one of the silly things I read the other day, someone wrote that he wasn't allowed to teach white students. Well, it was the opposite. He was hired at Wits to teach white students. So people write this nonsense. Anyway, she was telling me about this amazing teacher of theirs who wasn't called a lecturer. He was black, so they couldn't appoint a lecturer, a black at Wits. They called him a language assistant. But she was telling me about this remarkable teacher whom the class loved, and I was hearing about him in political terms. And one day I had to go and fetch her from the classroom, and I walked in, and she introduced me to Mr. Sobukwe, and it was simply an instant friendship, as simple as that. We liked each other, full stop, as people, as basic as that. There was no politics. We just liked each other. And we started meeting. And then again, the older people like me will remember, you won't know, you're too young, what apartheid was like. And it's almost impossible to describe the evil of that system and how it destroyed lives and controlled lives. When you think back, white and black, Bob and I, we could not travel in a cab together. We couldn't go in a bus together. We couldn't go to a cafe to sit down and have a cup of coffee together. It was illegal for me to visit him at his home in Soweto. He could come to my apartment when I was married in Killarney, but it had to be very careful and it wasn't legal. You had to be very careful what you did. Walking in the street together, people would look at you. For me to go in a car with a black woman was dangerous because I was in danger of the police being pulled over and checked for immorality. The whole of life was controlled. And at least I was white and I had privileges and I knew it and I used them. But Bob, as a black, pass laws, carrying a pass. So to develop a friendship wasn't an easy thing. And yet when I look back, I'm amazed at what we did, especially for a good third of the time, the 18 years we knew each other. He was in jail of one sort or another. And yet, look, I don't know, I might be wrong, but that was because there were friendships between whites and blacks. But the friendship between us was something so unique, extraordinary, the depth of it, and because of the circumstances, him emerging as a political leader and struggling to find himself, trying to decide what his fate was, because he had a status as a teacher at Wits, very unusual status. For a black person to hold that sort of job then was most amazing. There were just a handful of people like that. He had a good job. He had a comfortable little home in Soweto, a loving wife, family, and yet he had a struggle to decide what was his role in life. And he struggled with me as we became closer and closer. We talked about it. I knew all the things in advance because we talked about them confidentially, obviously, and our friendship grew. And even while he was in the island, our friendship developed because of the strangeness of the situation. In fact, I'm sorry, I'm jumping around a lot because that's the way it is. But after we met the first time, we started talking, and then we were talking politics a lot. And this became a very strange and interesting friendship because here was a black nationalist leader, and I was a Jewish liberal boy, okay, from Cape Town. And in ways, poles apart, and yet we were together. And I had a great empathy and understanding of African consciousness, of black consciousness. It was called African nationalism then, but it's the same, black consciousness, African nationalism, black nationalism. And it took me years to understand why I had this natural empathy. And the reason is an interesting historical one. If you know a bit of Jewish history with the persecution in Russia during the Tsar, there were mass murders of Jews. And about 1882, there was a massacre of about 60,000 Jews. And there was a Jew doctor, oh God, I've just had a block in my head, Pinsker. And he enunciated a policy called auto-emancipation. And the basis of it was, if you want the world to respect you, you must respect yourself. That's where you start. You've got to stand up and look the world in the eye. And that is Jewish consciousness and the way to freedom from oppression, and it's black consciousness. It's exactly this. That's what black consciousness is. You respect yourself, and therefore the world respects you. You get up off your feet and you fight back. So it took me a long time to understand why I had this sympathy, but underlying it was simply we liked each other and we got on well and we got closer and closer together. And because he went to prison and in Robben Island, things needed to be done for him and his family. No one else was doing it, and I gradually got drawn in and we became closer that way. Anyway, what I was trying to tell you about Robben Island, he spent 3 years in Pretoria prison because of Sharpeville, and that, of course, the massacre at Sharpeville was a turning point in South African history. It transformed South Africa and South Africa's relations with the world. And he was charged with incitement and got 3 years imprisonment for that, served in various prisons. I visited him a couple of times when he was in Pretoria prison. He asked me to come and see him. And then they were frightened of him. There was no man they were more frightened of than Robert Sobukwe. That's why they passed a special law of parliament, which was used against no one else. And they gave them, the government, the power. Every year, once a year, they would agree he's going to be kept in jail without trial for another year. And they took him out of prison in Pretoria, secretly flew him to Robben Island and locked him up on his own in virtual solitary confinement. And he was there for 6 years. Well, I was allowed to visit him a few times in the first year. And the cover was, I was doing a PhD at the time, and that's another story, into African nationalism and communism. And I applied for permission to visit him. And I was given permission. Now, Bob and I had no illusions. We knew why they were letting me see him. They wanted to know what he was thinking. So I would arrive at the island. They were always very good to me, warders, and they would take me and they put us in a little hut on the quayside and left us alone for the day. I'd take sandwiches with, and we sat in this little room all day long talking. No one bothered us. We knew there was a mic. The microphone we worked out was in the ceiling above us. We'd pass each other little notes now and again. The reason I'm telling you the story, we talked about who he was and what he was going to do. And he made clear the day he was released, he would start again and fight apartheid. And I sat there listening to him and looking at my friend, and I knew he was dooming himself to stay in prison in solitary confinement. He was telling them, I have not changed. I will not stop. And I noticed a change up to that point. They'd been especially good to him. They were very careful about him. They spoke about him with great respect. From then on, they virtually walked away and ignored him and just locked him up. He told them he would go for them. And I sat there listening to him and thinking, I am listening to someone of the utmost courage and commitment. I was profoundly moved and profoundly depressed. I used to come back from that visit just feeling just for his sake, for terrible. And it lasted long. It went on for 6 years. Now, the reason why they felt that way, and now we were going to talk, I was thinking about it, about his qualities. And perhaps the most important quality was that of leadership, which he stressed. And this goes back, you've got to know South African history a bit. In 1952, the African National Congress launched the Defiance campaign. It called on people to break the law. Whites to go and sit on park benches marked non-Europeans only. Black people to walk through entrances of post offices marked whites only, blancos halien. And these are minor offences. You've got 3 months imprisonment or a fine. It didn't matter very much. About 10 people volunteered, 10,000 people in a year of all colours. It was a very important campaign. The government broke it in a very simple way. They passed a law very quickly through Parliament, the all-white Parliament. If you broke a law by way of protest against another law, it became a very serious offence. You could get 5 years imprisonment. And if you repeated the offence, you could get a whipping. Overnight, the Defiance campaign ended. The leaders called it off because they faced 5 years and whipping and so on. The Africanists in the ANC never forgave the ANC leadership for this. And this was crucial for Robert Sobukwe and the Africanists launching the anti-pass campaign in 1960, in March 21, 1960. And Bob's statement, repeatedly declared, was, I will not ask you to do anything that I will not do myself. And he went first. That was the leadership. He led. It was courageous, it was visionary, it was amazing. Politically, it wasn't clever. You've got to understand that, because virtually the entire PAC leadership went with him. And here was this new organization that only been in existence about a year. Overnight, the entire leadership virtually went into prison. There was no organization left. It fell apart. So politically, it wasn't the wisest thing to do. And it was a miscalculation. They believed far more people would take part than actually did take part, although many did take part. But that was his leadership. And that's an important relevance for today when you think about it. When I look at South Africa today, and I get angry, and I want to cry, I don't want to cry, I'll get angry. I look at the betrayal of millions of people whose hopes and dreams have been dashed, and I read about the corruption, and the incompetence and the cadre deployment, and you know the whole story much better than I do. If Bob had been around, couldn't have happened. He could not have lived in a fancy house with big motor cars and guards and assured electricity and water if he knew that other people didn't have those things. It wouldn't have been possible for him to live like that. It wouldn't have allowed his leaders around him to live like that either. He set the example of leadership. He had an integrity about him and honesty. And you saw it in some ways, the way he dressed. Very simply, he lived in Soweto. He was well paid by black standards at that stage. He traveled third class on the trains with the ordinary workers. That's the way he was. He was a simple man. He dealt with problems. Sorry, there's another story that pops into my head. When he was in Kimberley, he told me he used to go to the bank. And in those days, the tellers in the banks, the counter clerks, were whites. And there was a young white man who used to deal with him. And whenever Bob went into the bank, the teller would call him Robert. And Bob said he took this a few times, and then one day said very quietly to this teller, "Why do you call me by my first name? We haven't been introduced." And he said the teller blushed, apologized, and from then on called him Mr. Sobukwe. That's how he dealt with that problem, in that quiet, dignified way. No screaming, no shouting, but he dealt with it effectively. That was in a nice way. Otherwise, he was as tough as anything. He took on the government, and he would have gone on doing it, which is why they locked him away, and they kept him banished. The solitary confinement had its effect. And this is an important thing to understand. We're all frail human beings. And Bob wasn't a superman. He was an ordinary human being. And 6 years of virtual solitary confinement, he told Helen Suzman, who visited him at one stage, was allowed to visit him, the member of parliament who was a friend of mine. And Helen told me that Bob told her he was forgetting how to talk because there's no one to talk to. Well, the effects of 6 years of this, because they used to do mean things to him. He was locked away in a small hut with a separate bathroom and two-room hut, and his food would be brought to him by a prisoner accompanied by a warder, and they were under orders not to talk to him. And his breakfast would be brought to him, he never knew when. Might be at 6:30 in the morning, might be at 7, might be at 8 o'clock, might be at 9, and he never knew. And that's a dislocating experience, and people don't talk to you. And after 6 years, it was getting through to him, and he was certainly having problems of mental stability, no question. And when they realized it, they threw him off the island immediately. That's why they banished him. Overnight, the moment they realized there was something going wrong, they took him off the island so they wouldn't have to accept any responsibility. And they took him to Kimberley, where he didn't know anyone, and locked him up there in banishment, dumped him in a huge house. And I used to go and see him, and I was very worried about him. And I had a friend, a very good friend, the late Dr. David Weinberg, who was a psychiatrist. And I asked Dave to go and spend a weekend in Kimberley with Bob to see what was going on. And he went and he came back and he gave me a report. And luckily for everyone, he got over it. But he did go through that bad patch. And there's a reason for my telling this story in particular, both to show we're dealing with a human being. That story's been perverted because he went on talking about it and people believed him because he had all sorts of strange stories that he believed in, which weren't true, that weren't related to reality. And again, people who don't know any better repeat these stories as though they were true. And you've got to know the truth about things, to honor his memory properly. But he came through it, and he became an attorney. And that again is a bit of a funny story. He was articled to a local attorney, happened to be a black guy, who used him, because famous Robert Sobukwe, his article clerk, a lot of clients came in all the time. And Bob used to tell me he was very upset because this attorney was charging too much. And when Bob finished his articles and qualified as a lawyer, this other guy wanted him to become his partner. He was a walking gold mine in law. And Bob told me he was tempted to do it for 6 months only and charge. And he said the worst harm he could do this guy would be to charge reasonable fees to people and pay him back. But he decided he couldn't stand it. This man was too much of a crook or charging too much. So he went off and started his own practice and did extremely well. He was a very good attorney. I mean, lawyers told me what he was like, very thorough and so on. So these are the stories, I can tell you about him. Our friendship was, I'm saying, remarkable. When I look back, when you think about what apartheid was, it's hard to believe that it actually happened, and yet it did. And I wrote his biography. Actually, the new edition has just come out just a few weeks ago. That's a new color. And I think this is about the 19th printing. It was first published in 1990, and it's now been printed about 19 times. So his name, the reason I'm telling you, I'm not just trying to sell the book, but his name lives on. That's the important thing. And the book's got bigger. There are now 40 pictures over the years because they've done well. But I want to tell you, there's also another book which people might want to know about. It's a collection of essays which I put together from eminent South Africans, New Reflections, essays about Sobukwe's legacy. And there's some wonderful pieces here. One of the most beautiful is by Bob's granddaughter. She wrote, because she never knew him, and she's written the most beautiful piece also. And if I may, I think this is important for people. There are 2 books of his letters from prison, mainly, which Dr. Derek Hook at the University of Pennsylvania, I think it is, I've just forgotten for a moment, he put together, and there are 2 books that are published. First one, Lie on Your Wounds, the prison correspondence of Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe. Got all the letters, and then they did a follow-up volume just a few months ago, Dark Before Dawn, also by Derek Hook. And anyone who's interested, these are most wonderful letters. He was a beautiful letter writer. A lot of the letters obviously to me, but the most lovely letters to Veronica Zodwa, his wife. Beautiful, and you must know, these are all censored. And that's another story I can tell you. We used to write to each other, and it was very hard correspondence because they would keep the letters. My letters, and 3, 4, 5 weeks before handing them over. And then they'd delay them. So he'd write and ask me about something. It'd be 2 months before I could reply. And then if there's something I didn't like in a letter, they never told us. They simply took the whole letter. They didn't blank it out. Letter never came. And 6 months later, I might discover a letter I wrote or he wrote to me just didn't get through. There's a cruelty and meanness in the way they behaved. And I used to agonize over my letters because some person I didn't know, some warder sitting somewhere, was going to go over my letters, and if there was a word he didn't like, letter wouldn't go through. So you had no idea what you were dealing with. So I'd sit and agonize over every word. And if you read the letters, a lot of them are quite bland, because I was trying to, if I use the phrase, scratch his mind, get him thinking, trying to make him think and argue with me, but not to the point that any censor would say no. But some remarkable stuff got through. We talked about religion a lot. He turned against Christianity at one stage, and that was because no Christian priest would visit him. The one person who did was the late Methodist Theo Kotzer, who was a lovely man, but they stopped Theo from going. They were too suspicious of him. And from then on, I tried to get priests to go and couldn't get them to go. They gave excuses. One priest said he got seasick. He wouldn't go on the ferry to Robben Island. I wouldn't go and see him. And it had a funny sequel, because Bob wrote to me that he had given orders to the prison authorities that in case a Christian priest wanted to come and see him, he didn't want to see him. And later the same day, his brother, who was an Anglican bishop, pitched up at the island to see him. And Bob was very embarrassed. He'd given an order that day, no Christian priest. And in the afternoon, his brother arrives. But he was interested in Judaism. We talked a lot about that. I sent him books, sent him a huge number of books. And then again, the place was crazy. I sent him a book once. I can remember it. It was called Africa and the World by Vernon Mackay, who was a very eminent American writer about Africa, totally Western. And I didn't know it, but the book had been banned for some mad reason. But I sent it off to Bob. I knew it would be of interest to him. And a while later, security police phoned me, and they called me into their offices in Johannesburg. And they've got the book in front of them. And they tell me that this book has been banned, and I'm facing charges of distributing, what are those called? Obscene, objectionable, or indecent books. Serious charge, 5 years, distributing banned book. And they invite me to make a statement. So I checked with my lawyer and I say, yeah, sure, I'll make a statement. I said, yes, I did send this book. They've got the wrapping paper with my handwriting on it, addressed to Sobukwe. And I said, I must be a madman if I'm going to send a banned book to Mr. Robert M. Sobukwe, care of Officer Commanding Robben Island Prison. And they looked at me and decided not to charge me. It would look too crazy. So those sort of things that you could laugh sometimes, a few times. Otherwise, it was serious. His needs developed. They let him wear his own clothes. And it really got a bit crazy because I opened an account for him, no longer exists. Studderford's was a very good English type middle class department store in Cape Town, high class. And Bob had an account there. He could order anything he wanted there. So he was well dressed on the island. It was all, this is crazy. He was the number one political prisoner. They're terrified of him. They feared him more than anyone else. But they let him wear his own clothing. He had a radio I sent him, a deck chair, cigars. It was all mad. And yet, at the same time, locked up, oppressed, frightened of him. Very strange. Yet his legacy is there. in his commitment to Africa. And then again, you've got to throw your mind back to history. In the early 60s, Africa was in a ferment. Freedom was coming from colonialism. But the Africanists did something unique. Their opening conference, on the walls there were posters about Africa, never been seen in South Africa before. Freedom for Africa, for Ghana, for Malawi, for Tanzania, totally new. And there were messages read of support from African leaders, which was totally unknown again in that time. So they were visionaries of all the era. And Bob, of course, had this idea of Africa for the Africans, which was a great concept. Unfortunately, we have a long way to go on that one. But anyway, I've been talking a lot. I'm sorry, I'm sorry it's been muddled. As ideas occur to me, I've just been pushing them out, and I hope it hasn't been too jagged, uneven for you.
Please don't worry. We are here to listen to you this morning. So because you did the biography, our youth don't really know these stories at all. I mean, obviously, Sobukwe is not in SA history high school books. So do you mind giving us his life story? Who was the man? And then also the second question is going to be, because you were there on Sharpeville Day, can you also just unpack what happened at Sharpeville? But please, let's start with the man. Who was the man?
Well, firstly, just behind me in my study, we were sitting in my study, very untidy study, it was a hard-working study, is a picture from March 21, 1960, of Bob leading people to the Orlando police station. It's a picture by the late Peter Magabane, and that's Bob in front with his hand. And I'd been with him that morning. I'd been at his home at about 5 in the morning, 4:35 in the morning, to say goodbye to him. And he was going off to offer himself for prison. But he was born in Graaff-Reinet in the Karoo, beautiful little town for those who know it, very Afrikaans town. I quote in my book a former security policeman who said the town was so Afrikaans that even the dogs barked in Afrikaans. To give you an idea. But it was a beautiful town, and it still is. But as you drive out on the right-hand side on the road to Johannesburg, there's some very nice-looking houses, different colors the last time I saw them, very picturesque. It's the location. It's horrible, or it was horrible. Now I don't know, but it was horrible. It was like an old-style location on the edge of a small town in South Africa. Run down, no proper water, no sewerage. The usual thing, and it used to be. It probably still is in many places. But he was born there, and his father was a Basotho, and his mother was Xhosa. Sorry, I used to have the click. I've lost the click looking at it. South Africa, Xhosa. And they were poor. His father was cleared the furrows in the town, in the gutters. Water used to run in the gutters, and he used to keep him clean. Worked as a labourer, and his mother was a domestic servant in white homes, but they had a passion for education. And this is a story. I've taken this lesson of the Sobukwe family throughout my life, and I've told people this. Books. They brought books for the children. His mother was illiterate. His father could barely sign his name, yet they got books. The mother would, with the people she worked for, the whites, when they were going to throw books away, she would say, could she take them? She used to go to the library, whites only, and ask for the books they were throwing away and bring them home. And the children read. It's a fundamental lesson for all of South Africa. Read, read, read. And this is again one of the miracles of our being people. How you have this family, poverty stricken, and yet look what they produce. One of the giants of Africa, an intellectual giant, a political giant, a brother who was one of the first Anglican bishops. How does it come from? It's a miracle. And we've got so much of that in South Africa. So many people I know, they're eminent people. When you ask them about their backgrounds, you're astonished that people came through like this. And something in the human spirit enables people to come through. But they grew up, the father was tough. Bob used to tell me that when they came home from school, they had to do schoolwork. And the father used a shambok on them. They didn't do their work, they got a whipping. It was tough discipline, okay? But they grew up. He was bright. He went to school, got scholarships, went to Heeltown. He first went to the local school. They're still there, it's a church there, a usual system, one hall with all different classes sitting in the same hall, a lot of sound and noise. And then he went to Heeltown. He got tuberculosis, so he had to drop out of school. And the usual trouble then that people would be held back a year because there wasn't place for them, there wasn't money for them. But he eventually landed up at Fort Hare in the 1940s. And that was the Fort Hare which had been started in about 1917. It was originally a few whites, but by then, in the 40s, there were only about 400 people, students, but it was the crucible for black political leadership. Everyone came out of there. Mandela came out of there. Godfrey Pitchie came out of there. Mugabe came out of there. And Sue Mokekle from Lesotho came out of there. Oliver Tambo, I think, came. The leaderships Dr. Z.K. Matthews was a teacher there. This was a place where black political leaders emerged from. And also Heeltown was, of course, a very important Methodist school. And this again is a bearing on where South Africa has been. The people who taught them were missionaries from England, Scottish and English. And they weren't racists, they were paternalists. And for example, at Heeltown, there was a family, the Cayley family, who looked after Bob. And I went to talk to them. They were very old, Cayleys. They were very old, but I saw them. And they had given him a scholarship. They got him medicines when he was ill. They looked after him. They wanted him to come and be a teacher at Heeltown. And they were very hurt by him because he'd gone into politics. They were terribly hurt. And they talked to me. I interviewed them. You can see it in my book. But the amazing thing is, I spoke to them, they were very old. I was trying to be very kind to them. And they told me he was like their son. They treated him like their son. So I said very quietly, I suppose he ate with you. Oh, no, he ate in the kitchen. That was the difference. This are paternalists. And yet they did so much for him in his life. What these missionaries did, they gave that emerging black middle class a wonderful education and gave them English manners. And I know that sounds old-fashioned, but if you look at Mandela, and if you knew Oliver Tambo and all the others, there was a courtesy about them. They spoke to people with a politeness and a courtesy which they got from these English, Scottish missionaries. A very important element in South African history. And it probably sounds, I don't know, paternalistic in itself and so on. But this is what I saw. And Bob was very much of that. This total courtesy was both innate to him and what he grew up with at Heeltown and from the missionaries around him. Now, the Afrikaner nationalists hated these missionaries, and they called the guys who, Mandela and Sobukwe, they called them black Englishmen. That was to them an insulting phrase, black Englishmen. I don't know if you ever heard that phrase. That was used about them. But that describes what, if you knew Mandela, exactly the same courtesy as Sobukwe. Same sort of person. And the others I knew in that same era, of that generation, were in the same mold. Anyway, so that's amazingly, when he got to Fort Hare, he had no consciousness of who he was and where he was. It's an astonishing thing. He just was not conscious what apartheid and discrimination meant. I had difficulty understanding this, but that was it. And the person who woke him up, the course he did was in what was used to be called native administration. The laws governing blacks. It was a course taught. There was a book about it. And Ntloko was his teacher. And Bob, they started finding themselves in the tremendous discussions in class and at night. And he became awake. About his second year, he started discovering who he was and what South Africa was. But until then, he was a rugby player. He was a tennis champion. He loved reading, loved Shakespeare, loved reading. At one stage in Pretoria prison, years later, for a little while, he and Mandela were together. And they were sitting on the concrete floor. What prisoners used to do was sew mail bags, filthy old canvas mail bags, which were damaged, and they'd sit there sewing them. Apparently these mail bags stank like hell. It was a horrible job. That was a prisoner's job. And they sat next to each other for a while and talked. And what did they talk about? They told me. Who was the greatest English writer? And I can't remember who chose which. One of them said Shakespeare and the other George Bernard Shaw. Now, it went on for a little while, and then the prison authorities got worried, these two men getting close together, and they were friends already, but having big political discussions, so they separated them. But there was that story, and that comes again from their student and school days, talking about who's the greatest writer. English writers again. That was their background. Anyway, university, he came alive. He became a student leader. The speech he gave to the first years went down in history as one of the great speeches ever given at that institution. It's in the books, the full text. And you read that, you can see the future Sobukwe. His thinking is there. It's all there. The opposition to segregation, to discrimination, to oppression, the belief in a non-racial South Africa, in the destiny of African people. It's all in that. It's all basically in that speech. He qualified after 3 years. By then, Heeltown didn't want him. He'd become too dangerous. He had trouble getting a job. He was already known to be dangerous. The principal of a high school in Standerton gave him a job, and he went to Standerton, and he was there in the early 50s. And I interviewed the principal. I went to the school. He was obviously just totally loved. He was a wonderful teacher. And then Wits gave him the job as language assistant. He got married to Veronica Zodwa. And he was in the Youth League. That's the other thing. The Youth League, the ANC Youth League, which doesn't amount to much today, I gather, but in its time, it was a very powerful force inside the African National Congress. In fact, it was a driving force, begun in the 1940s. The 1940s were interesting. The president was Dr. Kuma, and he ran a one-man show. He was president for 8-9 years in the 1940s, but a remarkable man, a medical doctor in Sophiatown, but he ran it as a one-man show almost. But he in a way, he modernized the ANC. But by the time in 1949, the Youth League came in. Mandela was one of the leaders then. Bob played a role. There was a famous conference in Bloemfontein where the Youth League changed the leadership and developed the concept of non-collaboration, a vital part of the ANC's history. No collaboration with the oppressor. And then again, I'm sorry, I'm jumping around. The Defiance campaign was non-collaboration, and where the Africanists accused the ANC of deserting the concept of non-collaboration. And that's what March 1960 was all about. It was non-collaboration. You do not take part in your own oppression. You do not take part in the past laws. And that was non-collaboration, was a crucial factor in Africanist and Bob's thinking. So he started taking part in this developing new thinking inside the African National Congress, objecting to the leadership being timid, objecting to communist influence inside the ANC, which was there, because the Communist Party had been banned in 1950, and you had this group of highly skilled political people who went into the ANC behind the scenes secretly. So you had a secret leadership who were pulling the strings behind the scenes, and the Africanists objected to this. And so I just see the question up. I'll deal with it. Jackie Siraki, hello. I'll just finish the point about non-collaboration. And this was a central feature of Africanist thinking. And finally, the Africanists broke away from the ANC in 1958 or something. The PAC was formed, and in March 1960, Bob issued a declaration to call on black people to leave their passes, the hated dompas, at home, go to the nearest police station, offer themselves for arrest, and flood the jails. And again, to take what I started at the beginning, I will go first. I will not ask you to do what I won't do. And he left his pass at home and went to prison that day. That was the massacre that day. I was at Sharpeville, right in the thick of the crowd. The stories the police gave of the crowd being hostile was rubbish. I was a white man with a photographer right in the heart of the crowd. I was scared of the police arresting me. I was there illegally, so I was hiding in the crowd. And once I told people I was from the Rand Daily Mail, I was sitting on the pavement and surrounded by people who were telling me their troubles about the past laws, about poverty and so on. I had no trouble. And then the shooting happened, and that's another story. And then he was arrested, and I'd been with him in Soweto on his way to prison, and I didn't see him again until Pretoria prison. This point that Jackie Siraki has raised is an important one. it's said that there's no voice recording of Sobukwe, and some people have suggested there's some sinister conspiracy about this. And I've explained this before, and I should explain it again. It's nonsense. Firstly, when I saw him on Robben Island, I taped him. And this might sound strange now. In those days, tape recorders were not all that common, and cassettes were unknown. They just didn't exist then. And I had quite a biggish, it was a reel-to-reel computer with reels about that big, and you put them on and so on. And I was on a scholarship doing my PhD. I wasn't very. I was rather poor, and having to spend a lot of money in Cape Town doing research and traveling around, and money was scarce. So I was taping Bob and doing a lot of other interviews, and I had a secretary in Johannesburg I was sending the tapes to, and she was transcribing them, and then I recycled the tapes. As simple as that. I use them again because they were expensive. In those days, it's not like later on cassettes were dirt cheap. This cost money, and I had no reason to keep the tapes. I didn't have a sense of I was preserving history or anything like that. I only kept my letters because I had to keep track of what was going on. I didn't set out to have a whole bunch of letters like that. The first few letters don't exist because I didn't keep them, I think. So in regard to the rest of his voice was heard in court when he was charged, and that was transcribed because they did appeal, although they weren't supposed to, and the record was transcribed. But they used to use sort of funny pink plastic tapes, and I try to find those, and others have tried to find them. But it goes back, we're talking about 1960, and these are fragile plastic things. I've never come across, if anyone can find that recording of him talking in court, good luck to them. I couldn't find them. And so he was in prison for 3 years, so no way of recording him. Robben Island for 6 years, and I recorded him, but as I say, I wiped the tapes clean, or rather I reused them. Then when in Kimberley, he was banned, and I'd go and see him. If I drove to Kimberley, as I drove into the town, there was a police car behind me, and they followed me. When I flew in and I hired a car at the airport, as I drove out of the airport, there was a security police car behind me, and they followed me. And when I fetched Bob, we'd go and find a spot. We had to stay inside the city boundary. We'd find on the edge of Kimberley, middle of summer, a scraggly thorn bush, a tiny bit of shade, and we'd sit there and spend hours with a soft drink and a sandwich talking. Security police 20, 30 feet away in their car, facing us. The sun glinting. I remember, never forget it. Sun glinting on the sun on their windscreen. I had no idea if they were using a direction microphone on us to listen to us. I didn't know any moment they'd come and grab us. And if I'd been taping Bob, he would have been charged, a serious charge. I didn't tape him. I didn't dare tape him. I didn't go to the hotel. They could have raided me at the hotel. He would have been charged. I would have been charged as an accessory, but he could have faced a few years. So I never taped him. It was too dangerous. When he came and stayed at my home later on, he was allowed to visit Johannesburg occasionally. I was too scared to tape him because they could have jumped us at any moment. They were following us all the time. You couldn't do it. It might sound stupid now and silly, but you've got to think what it was like at the time. They were watching you. And any moment they could simply come in and do what they liked. And his liberty was on the line. You know, I'd face charges, but he was the one who'd get it. He was banned. It was an offence for him to say anything for publication. So there's no tape recording. There's nothing sinister about it. Gail Gerhardt, an American scholar who went to see him, didn't tape him. She spent a couple of hours and went away and made notes, and she wrote a whole book about it. I've looked at the book. Some of what she said, the nuances are not quite right, because she wrote it from her memory. I used to try and make notes sometimes, carefully. In fact, I can tell you, when I was doing my PhD, and I never finished it because the police raided me and seized all my papers. It's another story. But the day when they came, and they came into my apartment, there were 9 of them, and served a warrant on me for my papers. And I had a cupboard from floor to ceiling with my research papers. And I'd go and fetch them to give them to them. And the first pile I took down, on top was an interview with the late Godfrey Pitchie, who was banned. And I looked at this, it was about 6 o'clock in the morning. Oh my God, I'm going to get Godfrey into trouble. So I hid the papers. Okay? They found them eventually. And I was charged. You know what they charged me with? Theft. They said I'd stolen my papers from them. Can you believe it? They charged me with stealing my papers from the police. Although they only found them later on. That's how mad the place was. But that gives you an idea. I just saw Pitchie's name at the top and I panicked. I thought, Christ, I'm going to get Pitchie Godfrey, who's a good friend, into trouble. It was that you had to be very careful. People got charged with these things. And I had to protect Bob. So that's the reason. And I'm the one who could have done the taping, didn't do it. That's it. And there are good reasons for it. So please must leave the story alone that there was a conspiracy to keep him silent and so on. There were good reasons for it, for his own personal safety. Sorry.
Yeah, I know it's like we're diving deep into your memory and it's been a long time. So you were at the part where he goes to Kimberley. So can we just finish it off until his death?
I used to visit him regularly. I mean, we could talk on the phone and say our letters lesson because we were talking on the phone a lot. But I'd go down whenever I could. And I couldn't go over a weekend because he was under house arrest. And those were sad times. We'd spend the day together. And then towards sunset, I would drive him to the edge of Kalashewwe and drop him off and stand there and watch him walking off into the dusk and just feel terribly sad. And each year as the renewal came up, we'd wait anxiously and it always renewed. Anyway, one time I was there in mid-year, it was winter and he was coughing badly and I was very worried. And I said, look, you must get yourself checked. And he said that the hospital was pretty awful in Kimberley for him. He had a bad doctor. And I said, I must try and get you to Johannesburg to see a decent doctor. And I had a very good friend, the late Dr. Bodo Koch, who escaped from the Nazis in 1939. He was a very wonderful doctor. And Bodo agreed to go into his room. In those days in Jeppe Street, all the doctors had their rooms. And Bodo said he'd go in on a Saturday morning, especially to see Bob. And I applied to the Minister of Justice for permission for Sobukwe to come and spend the weekend being examined medically. And it took time, and that became important. Security police delayed, and they finally said yes, and they were very curt and unpleasant about it. But what was a bit funny was blacks weren't allowed to stay in white areas. They insisted he had to stay at my home in Parktown North, because they didn't want him to stay in Soweto. So the order was I could fetch him at the airport, drive him straight to Jeppe Street, only to Dr. Koch's rooms, take him to my home in Parktown North. No one was allowed to visit us. He had to stay indoors, and take him to the airport on the Sunday. So we were followed from the airport, and because of the incompetence of the Kimberley Hospital, he hadn't brought x-rays with him. They couldn't find them. So Bodo did a check, and we sat on afterwards, and Bodo said there was some trouble with the heart. There was a virus, but it could be treated. And we had a very happy conversation. We were joking that Bob would have to come regularly for checkups, and he'd stay with us, and we were looking forward to a good time. We laughed about it, and I was too scared to walk across the road to have another x-ray done, because we were being watched. And if we had crossed the street, he could have been arrested. So I carefully drove home, and we stayed home, and my mother-in-law came, but we followed the rules. You had to. I went off on a trip to America. About 2 weeks later, I was in America, and Anne phoned me, frantic. Bob had finally got the x-rays from Kimberley and sent them to Bodo Koch. And Bodo Koch, a good doctor, took one look, and he saw lung cancer. And now the delays that we'd had started counting, because the lung cancer was advanced. I wrote a letter to the minister, Jimmy Kruger, which is just about the most insulting letter I've ever written. I accused him and the government of allowing the cancer to get to where it was because the delays. They didn't know the delays. I was very angry. I got a letter back from Kruger saying never to write to him again. Anyway, they let Bob go to Cape Town University. Not Barnard. Barnard's ward. People misunderstand this. Barnard was not the surgeon. Chris Barnard wasn't the heart surgeon, wasn't a lung surgeon. They did lung cancer. They took out a lung. Again, they were very cruel to him. He was allowed to go out to convalesce a bit, and he went to the bishop's house in Bishop's Court. He just got there in a white area. This is apartheid then. He just a few minutes after he got there, Veronica told me the story, security police arrived. Pushed out of the way, he was in the bathroom. Pushed their way into the bathroom. Ordered him, get out. You're not allowed to be out, it's a white area. You either go back to hospital or to Kimberley. Veronica used to tell me he had to report to the police in Caledon Square, painfully walking, and then, it was just terrible, terrible, terrible. Then one of the doctors who was in the heart team was wonderful, gave him, took him into their house in Camps Bay, and he spent a lovely weekend there, looking out over the sea. Sorry, in Pinelands. I'm so sorry. Somebody else in Camps Bay. But it was too late. And we used to go and see him. And one weekend we were there. I spent the day with him, Anne and I, at his hospital bed. And that again was an amazing occasion because at one stage, I was standing next to him holding his hand, and a priest came in He was colored, and there was an Indian woman there, and it was South Africa, white, black, Indian, colored, and we were praying together. And I remember Bob lying there and saying, God still wants me to do his work. And he was better by the time we left that day, and we thought we'd come again in a few days' time. But just a few days later, early in the morning, Veronica phoned me, and he died. In his 50s. And I may say, in my life, I've had a long life, and I've known some wonderful people. You know, South Africa was a pressure cooker. It either destroyed you, and it destroyed millions of people, or it made you like steel. And they've been wonderful, and there are wonderful South Africans. And I've been privileged in my life and my work to know some extraordinary human beings. But my two closest people in my life were Bob Sobukwe and the late Ernie Wenzel, who was a brilliant lawyer and helped me with Sobukwe in legal ways. And both of them died in their 50s. And I've always been really angry with both of them because they left me feeling really lonely. But that was my friend who did so much for South Africa and could have done so much more, but his leadership, his integrity, his belief in everything from Africa to, and his basic statement is one race, one human race only. That's it, as simple as that. That is the lesson for South Africa.
And thank you so much. Can I just ask you to cover just a few questions before I let you go? I know you are emotionally drained, and I hope you've got a little bit of energy for this last little bit. Okay, we've already covered. Oh, somebody's asking why Mangaliso didn't escape to leave the country while he was banished in Kimberley.
Well, escape, he was watched. It's a small town, and yet they had enormous respect for him. The head of the security police used to take him sometimes. Bob loved boxing. He used to take him to boxing matches on Saturday nights in Kimberley. Once I came through my family on the train, and we came through Kimberley. The train stopped for about half an hour at about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning or something. They let him come and visit us, spend on the station with us. It was a very strange mixture. They were his jailers, but they had respect for him. But they watched him, and they were reporting to Pretoria. I can tell you a funny story once. They were always following me around, as I was telling you, and I got tired of this. And I was in the hotel, and I came out one Sunday morning, and it was summer. I had floppies on and shorts and a t-shirt. That's all. And two of them sitting outside the hotel in a car. I used to do stupid things. I walked up to them. I leaned down to the car. And I said, "Why are you following me?" Ach, man. That's a stupid thing to say. You did these things. A few minutes later, a car comes roaring up. It's the local major and the captain. Very aggressive. Get out of the car, come up to me. Why are you asking questions? Now, I must tell you, I was scared stiff. these guys just picked me up and carried me away, and that's it. And I knew it. So I'm standing there, and I'm a middle-aged guy in these shorts and so on, and I'm scared of I know my knees are knocking from nervousness. So to hide my fact my knees are knocking, I'm jumping from one foot to the other. So you have this mad sight of this middle-aged guy in shorts and a t-shirt hopping from one foot to the other in the street, having a screaming match with these security, but screaming. And one of them made the mistake of using a four-lettered word to me. And this again was the madness of South Africa. I turned at him and I yelled at him, "How dare you use language like that to me? I will report you to your superiors." Now, I know this sounds crazy. This is where it happened. They immediately became placatory. They apologized to me. They said, "Please, Mr. Progan, you know we've got to watch you. Our people in Pretoria want to know what you're doing here." I said, "You know what I'm doing here. Why are you following me all the time?" Had a screaming match on a Sunday morning. They never followed me again after that. Yes. This was crazy. But the sight, I wish someone had taken a picture of me hopping around because my legs were shaking. I see how frightened I was, jumping around one leg to the other. So that used to happen. So he didn't escape. Anyway, he wouldn't have. It wasn't in his nature. There was one time when his banning was going to expire, and we had a mad idea that they might overlook it because they made mistakes. And I was going to come down and be available and rush him to the Kimberley border. I was then an assistant editor at the Rand Daily Mail, and my editor was a very fine man, Raymond Lowe, the Raymond Lowe, who was a great believer, practicer of press freedom. But I was, an assistant editor, I had an obligation to my newspaper, and I told Ray Lowe what I was planning to do. And Ray Lowe didn't say to me, "Don't do it." He said to me, he had no doubt that whatever I did, I would bear in mind the consequences for the newspaper. And I realized that if I did that, it would be an incredible weapon for the government to attack the Mail, which was under threat anyway. So I did drop the idea. But Bob wouldn't have done it. And anyway, they banned him immediately. He said, fell away. He did apply to go. He was offered a teaching position at American University, and he did apply. He felt he just had to get out. But the banning overtook that. Once you were banned, I was in the same position. I applied at one stage for an exit permit, and they arrested me, and that did away with the application. So it just didn't happen.
Okay. And then also, when you say that he would never run away, it also speaks to, I saw a documentary the other day where you said that he was so modest, and in prison, when you tried to bring him like a carpet or a rug, he was like, "No, I'm here for my people. I'm not here for fancy things."
That's correct. In Robben Island, I got a bit too enthusiastic sometimes. And once I said, "Look, why don't I send you some paintings to put on the wall of your of his prison and a carpet?" And he very gently said, "No, I'm in prison. Let's not overdo this." But he used to have a deck chair at least, so he could sit outside. And he was inside the stockade, barbed wire fence, with a hut in the middle and the ablution block next to it. And there was 24-hour guard, two at night, I think, and one during the day in a sentry box. And these are all white warders on Robben Island. And they obviously resented it. The guy, a white warder, sitting in a middle of summer again in a sentry box. And here was Bob Sobukwe, number one political prisoner, sitting in a deck chair, smoking a cigar, listening to the radio, and reading a newspaper. They did a lot. They treated him almost as a prisoner of war. That was the attitude. but there were limits, and he certainly did not want too much. He was very, and I gave this a lot of thought that he was getting all this attention and things from me, whereas there were so many people in need. But I was also doing things for other prisoners, too, I must say. But on the other hand, I rationalized it. This is the person I knew as my friend, and I was in a position to do something, and it was being allowed, and it was important to try and keep him up. The thing all the time, as I said at the beginning, was to get him thinking, keep him alive. That was the vital thing all the time.
Dr. Benji, some of these questions are going to be a bit hard for you, like this next one from Jackie Siroke. The reasons behind arrangement.
Yeah, oh no, and the police. I'll tell you, it's a funny, well, it's a story. Bob used to be occasionally allowed to come up. Someone brought him, a friend drove him there to leave Kimberley at midnight on Friday night and had to be back in Kimberley midnight on Saturday, 24 hours. So they'd leave at midnight, drive through the night, come to our home. He'd get showered and have breakfast, and we then go shopping. And in the afternoon, they'd leave again, go back to Kimberley. And one Saturday morning, he wanted to go, again, a department store in town called John Orr's used to be there, middle class. He wanted to go to John Orr's to do some shopping. I said, fine. So we get in the car, and before I got in the car, I'm a journalist, I took my camera and just shoved it under the seat. And I drove into town, dropped Bob off at the entrance, the main entrance, and went and got parking. And went walking in and looking for him, and walking around looking for him, I bumped into Gacha Buthelezi, who was a friend of mine. Gacha was then very much with the Zulu Bantustan. And I was good friends with Gacha. And he had his whole retinue with him. He always had bodyguards and secretaries and so on. Hello, how are you? And so on. Bob's here. Oh, I want to see Bob. Now, there was a history about this, because I used to see Gacha, and he'd always say to me, how's Bob? And I'd say, he's fine. Why don't you contact him? Oh, yes, I'd like to. Gacha, here's Bob's phone number. When he was in Kimberley, here's phone number. And the next time I saw Bob, I'd say, did you hear from Gacha? No. And it became a joke between us. Gacha was always asking about Bob and saying and never phoned him. I think he was jealous of him, frankly. Okay, but he never. But between Bob and me, it became a joke. Have you heard from Gacha? I'd laugh like hell. Okay. Anyway, so I say to Gacha, Bob's here. Oh, I want to see him. I said, well, come along. He said, no, you must come to me. So I cursed. So I go wandering around this big store. I find Bob. I say, Gacha's here. Let's go and meet him. No, he must come and see me. So I'm now in the middle of this. I've got Gacha there, Bob at the other end of the store, and I'm negotiating between the two of them and cursing like hell. Yeah, this is a ridiculous situation. I finally bring them together on the pavement outside John Orr's, opposite the Supreme Court. I can show you the exact spot. Okay. And meanwhile, while all this is going on, I run to my car nearby and I grab my camera and I come back with the camera. And they meet each other, they're friendly, they hug, and they're laughing and smiling, and I take a picture. And as I take the picture, I'm saying to myself, the security police will never believe this was an accident. They're going to believe I set this up. Okay. The picture appeared on the Monday morning in the Rand Daily Mail. Is a sequel. Any time Bob was ever angry with me that I know of. A couple of months later, Gacha asked me for a copy of the picture, which I sent him. And Bob told me that he'd been told that Gacha, on a visit to Tanzania, had addressed a students' meeting, had held up a picture of him and his friend Robert Sobukwe. And Bob was very angry about that he'd been used. So that's the story behind that one. And all sorts of stupid, well, I see the PAC also say this. Well, the security believed it was that's exactly the way it happened. A series of accidents, crazy things, and I was in the middle of bringing these two people together. And that's how it happened.
And then Dr. Benji, I know we are stealing a lot of your time now. We're almost at the end. Utwa, did you have any reservations about Sobukwe's politics when you first met
Yes.
him, spoke him?
Yes. Oh, no, we argued a lot. We agreed on a lot. We agreed on Pan-Africanism. We agreed on communism. We agreed on racial feelings. We agreed on religion, all sorts of things. We had a huge agreement. I disagreed with him when I first met him. My first impression was this was a very timid man. This was an academic. And it took me only about the second meeting I began to realize what I thought was timidity was actually modesty and humility. And I began to recognize the strength in him, and our friendship developed. That is at the beginning. And I write about that. My first impression was, but it grew. And what I thought were weaknesses were in fact tremendous inner strengths. I came to realize that. My worry about African nationalism, I used to say to him, look, I can understand that in order to gain unity, you've got to build up African feelings against whites. You've got to hate people to be able to fight them. One day, he's talking about non-racism. You can't just, when freedom comes, you can't just press a button and overnight everyone loves each other. There's that famous phrase from Alan Paton's book, Cry the Beloved Country, where near the end, the Imfundisi, the black priest says, my great fear is that when they, the whites, will have turned to loving us, we, the blacks, will have turned to hating. It's such a prophetic statement. And I used to use that and say, that's my worry. I agree with you about the need to build up nationalism and feeling, but you've got a country of all sorts of people. How do you ensure peace at the end? And we used to argue about that, and we never resolved it. Never. It was an issue between us all the time. But so on that point, I disagreed. Otherwise, I can't think of anything. We obviously talked, we disagreed on this and that, but our outlook was so much the same about virtually everything. I can't think of anything that we actually argued about. No, except that very crucial point, of course. And that's, of course, one sees the signs of it in South Africa. There are people on both sides who use racism. It's still part of South Africa, which you've got to deal with.
And then in closing, I think you just kind of answered this, right? About, it says Benjamin POGRUND views on Sobukwe from POGRUND's notes during interview with Sobukwe 3rd May 1958. I'm not over impressed by Sobukwe. I find his thinking tending to be patchy.
Yes, I've just dealt with that. I said that's what I found. But read the next page. You read the one page. Turn the page. In fact, I had a problem with this. A member, I won't mention who, a member of Sobukwe's family, who came across that part and was very cross with me, saying this about him. I said, no. Read the next paragraph. It's totally different. I was being honest. My first impression was a very fine academic, a wonderful teacher, a man who was loved by his students. But, in politics, I was dealing with politics also. There was this ferment in the ANC. There was a huge struggle going on for control and power inside the ANC. And I meet this guy who was behind the scenes at that stage. He was known to be writing for the Africanist publication called The Africanist, but he was very much behind it. This is part of his struggle, what to do. And our friendship was developing as he was struggling with himself. I went through that with him. I knew about the coming anti-pass campaign before just about anyone else, because we talked about it. Oh, he was offered, just when he decided to launch the campaign, he was offered a full-time lectureship at Rhodes University. It's unique, the first guy. And here he was being offered security, status, unknown for a black guy in that town at that time. And he had a family. And he struggled. And I knew, we talked about it at great length. And I watched and listened to his struggle internally. And he had to decide who he was and what he was going to do. And he worked it out. His commitment was to his people. That PAC slogan, service, suffering, something other. He meant it. You gave service to your people. You suffered for it. And I was with him as he agonized within himself. And my respect for him grew because I watched the struggle. It didn't just come like that. Oh, I'm going to do this tomorrow. He struggled to find himself. And once he did, and he set off on that course, he did never turn back. And that's the example.
Dr. Benji, thank you so much for your time. Can I ask one more question? Because when I called you, you said that you are in Jerusalem. And now we're having this conversation about apartheid, right? So I just want you to give us some insights on the war that's happening that side, juxtaposed to here. Yeah, you get what I'm saying.
Oy vey. I'm in a difficult situation, a personal situation. I used to write a lot about the situation here. I write just about nothing now. I'm not able to defend what is happening here. I'm totally against it, the war in Gaza. At the same time, I will not join in the criticisms of Israel because, and I follow very closely what goes on in the world, South Africa and others, there is so much lying, so much distortion. And my attitude is what it was under apartheid. When I used to tell my staff on the Rand Daily Mail, apartheid is evil, report it straight. There is no need to distort or to say wrong things. And what happens here is wrong. There is no need to distort it, to lie about it. And the lying is colossal. And it starts with a lot of people in South Africa, I'm sorry to say. I don't believe in the genocide argument. I reject it. It's the other way around. There are horrible things happening in Gaza. I don't know why we're killing so many and why we wreak such destruction. But if Hamas were to stop tomorrow, that would end. Everyone forgets that. Hamas have got hostages, the most terrible situation to do to people, to keep people hostage in tunnels underground. Hamas is an Islamist extreme organization. There are not many people in South Africa who would like to live with Hamas as their government. Just remember that, what you're dealing with. You're dealing with a bunch of pretty awful people who want to control the world, and I say that literally. But I have no truck with what the Israeli government is doing. I'm totally against it. I'm totally against the occupation, totally against it. There are reasons for it. I wrote a book about it. We can have another separate discussion about this. There are historical reasons. There's the fear here, because you must remember, and I've said this to Palestinian friends over the years, I scream at them. A lot of this, Jews have been driven to the right because they're suicide bombers. bombs in buses, people being. I've had friends family being killed. I mean, in Gaza on October 7, 2 years ago, one of our closest friends, her aunt, she and her husband were murdered. Their 16-year-old son, they'd hidden him under a sack, under a blanket. The mother threw herself on top of him. She got shot in the back. The kid was lying under her. He got injured. He lived. He lay there quietly for 5 hours until he was rescued. But the mother and father were killed in front of him. We've got friends like that. This is a small community. Everyone knows these terrible stories. And this is not a good resistance movement. These are people who set out to kill Jews. You've got to understand that. That's where the genocide is. You read the Hamas charter, you read their statements. They want to exterminate Jews. That's me. They want to exterminate me. I take it personally. But having said all this, I'm totally against what we're doing. It's wrong. It's un-Jewish. It's immoral. But I don't like the lying, the distortion. It's bad enough as it is without the lies going on. The apartheid issue, I spent 20 years, I was at the Durban anti-racism conference. I represented the Israeli government, oddly enough, there. First time and only time in my life, I represented a government. And bad things happened there. That was anti-Semitism, blindly. But I've watched over the years, I totally rejected the accusation that Israel is apartheid. We've changed. It's not apartheid in the strict South African sense. Take the medical thing. I've been very ill in the last few years. I spent a lot of time in hospitals and clinics. My doctors are Jewish and Arab. My nurses are Jewish and Arab. The patients next to me, I mean, anyone who knew apartheid knows it's unthinkable. Arab, Jewish, up the road. I live in a very nice part of Jerusalem. My pharmacist, they're Arab, so what? They're good pharmacists, that's all I care about. The supermarket down the road, the managers, I think they're owned by Arabs, I'm not sure. Some of my best doctors are Arabs or Jews. So what? If what goes on in the hospitals here could be transferred to society as a whole, this would be a paradise. Unfortunately, it isn't. There's a lot of fear, both sides, antagonism. It could be better. It's a bad scene, and the government at the moment, I'm totally against. On the apartheid issue in South African terms, in which you think about apartheid, that's nonsense. It doesn't exist. But what you call institutional racism, that has become so. That worries me. Firstly, the occupation has changed. It could previously be understood and justified in terms of a military occupation in international law. It's gone beyond that, and that worries me. And there are things happen in this country which I think I call institutional racism. And I now have written publicly saying we're on the way to apartheid. But it's not apartheid in any South African sense. It's not genocide. I mean, the genocide argument is, in 1948, there were about 450,000 Arabs, I think, in this country. There are now about 2 million, and they've got full rights, same vote. Everyone belongs to a national health scheme in this country, social welfare. Everyone belongs to it. Everyone gets exactly the same benefits, the same. Got to understand that. To tell me that's apartheid is just a joke. You don't know what apartheid means. I lived under apartheid. To call it apartheid, it's some other word that needs to be invented, because there is racism. So the other thing, people say it's an ethno-state. Of course it is. It's a Jewish state. Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Indonesia, half the countries in the world are Muslim states. Muslim. The Muslim Republic of Iran, of Saudi Arabia. They don't have Christian citizens, not allowed. This country is a polyglot. Jews, Christians, and not all Arabs are the same, by the way. The Druze, who are Arabs, but a particular group of them, and Muslims, since 1948, they have been conscripted in the army like Jews, exactly the same. And you've got Jews generals. You've got Arabs on the Supreme Court. It's not a straight. In other words, it's not a straightforward, 2 and 2 is 4. It's a complicated situation. There's a lot of ugliness in it. I don't disguise it. At the moment, I'm horrified. I pick up a newspaper and open my computer in the morning and I read what's going on, and I'm horrified. Let me make that clear. A lot of people, if you follow the news, you show me another country in the world, the number of people in the streets protesting day after day. Protests in Georgia, India, and so on. In this country, for the last 2-3 years, hundreds of thousands of people. I used to go, I'm too old now. I'm too scared there'll be a police charge, they'll knock me over and I'll be killed. My wife goes. We live round the corner from the president's house. Protests have been there. The prime minister's home is a quarter mile away. Traffic jams in my area are terrible because there are protests all the time. The roads are closed off. The whole country's in a state of protest. There's a lot of anger. A lot of people are totally against what is going on. But you have a government that doesn't want to listen. Not unusual. You've got a minority here, not unusual in the world. It's got basic rights. It's got disabilities. But the word apartheid, you've got to be very careful how you deal with it. It's not straightforward. Nothing simplistic about it. Is that kind of an answer?
Yeah, thank you.
I must tell you, you dragged something out of me that I normally only my closest friends who are very close to me, and we can talk to each other and shout at each other. And very few people I will talk easily to about this. I just feel terrible. But then I look at South Africa, and as I said earlier, I want to scream or I want to cry. I look at America, and my hair stands up. And what's going on there? I look at the Ukraine, and I look at Sudan. I wrote to the Guardian in London earlier this year, angry letter to the editor, because Sudan was getting no publicity. And they write about Gaza day in, day out. And I said, thank you for your coverage about Gaza. Will you please give 1/10 of your space and attention to Sudan? Please. You don't care because it's Africa. Now Sudan is getting publicity. That's what we must worry about. Why is South Africa agonizing about Sudan and the Congo and what Rwanda is doing and Burkina Faso? That's what I look at. Why is the world? I see America's going to cut out all the embassies in Africa. That's what we must worry about. So with apartheid, careful, not straightforward. but I won't defend anything.
Hey, that depends. I don't want to abuse the elderly.
Anyway,
I'm sure
all
you've
being well, I'll be on a plane to Johannesburg, please God, next Tuesday night, next Wednesday. I'll stop over in Addis, and I hope to spend a few weeks in Johannesburg, which I love coming to.
beautiful. Thank you for your contribution to the struggle for freedom in this country. Thank you for giving us your time and insights. This has been really like an eye opener. We really thank you for this conversation. You know how rare it is. So we really want to thank you for your time and your wisdom and your insights. And thank you to everybody who joined in and is watching. And thank you. And please, guys, look out for the books. Dr. POGRUND, where are they exclusive books?
Yes, exclusive will have all these books. Yeah.
Okay, fine.
And
Okay.
the new edition's got a lovely color. They've used this gold color, which I like. The previous ones had red and blue and so on, but this is a new one.
Beautiful. Thank you so, so much. I'll definitely be getting a copy. And thank you to everybody who joined. And I'm going to cut the live stream now as I say goodbye to Uncle Benji. Thank you so, so much.